Welcome. My name is Clark Korb. I'm a holistic health practitioner, and today I will be examining the nature of beliefs, those which we form both consciously and unconsciously, providing a means to recognize those beliefs which do not serve us particularly well, and offering some ways to adopt more empowering beliefs which would better serve us. So, some general attributes of beliefs, and as I like to start these discussions with a little bit of a definition so that we can be on the same page. Here I'm throwing out there that beliefs are habits of thought where we associate meaning or causality from a place of subjectivity. So important components of this are namely a habit of thought and the subjective aspect of that. So these habits of thought tend to be well reinforced. We often treat them as facts because we've practiced them so frequently, but since they are subjective, they really are not facts. They are not objective. And as these essentially well-practiced opinions go, even if an aspect of a belief is verifiably factual by objective measures, it always includes some aspect of a person's perspective and therefore is partial, or at the best, a partial truth in that sense. A great example of this is with the prism. You can objectively have a prism and shine white light into it and see light refracted on the outside of the prism. Now, if this prism were large enough that each independent observer could only see one sub-band, sub-waveform, if you will, they would only see purple, for example, or another person would only see green. Each could objectively be correct in viewing only their color, but they would be partial in their observation of the entirety of the process, that these other colors exist, for example. And in practical terms, our beliefs are kind of a code that we sort of operate in the world with. To quote one of my favorite songwriters and musicians, John Mayer has a song, Belief. And within that, the song starts off, "Is there anyone who ever remembers changing their mind from the paint on a sign?" And he closes the song with, "What puts 100,000 children in the sand? Belief can. What puts the folded flag inside his mother's hand? Belief can." Aside from the context that he's speaking with, the point is that belief is powerful. Beliefs, or our belief system, collectively, they govern the actions that we choose to take. Our beliefs govern the actions that we also choose not to take. Again, not necessarily residing in fact, but on our belief system. It determines what we allow ourselves to receive. This can be as simple as accepting a gift or a compliment, or not being open to that. It can relate to our willingness to receive help or resources, whether or not we believe we're deserving of such help or resources. It can affect our ability to be open to other perspectives or learning new information. And it can very much impact the ability for our bodies to heal, to be vibrant, to assimilate nutrients well. Our bodies literally take on what we hold in our beliefs. And this is a wonderful reason to practice conscious eating, and I mentioned this earlier in a prior video. It's also a good reason why people often offer blessings to food, where that came from, to raise the vibration of the food, so to speak. It's also essential that we reinforce messages of wholeness and self-love when talking to ourselves. If we're saying that we kind of despise some aspect of our body, or that we never have any energy and we can't concentrate, or whatever these kind of negative programming messages are, we'll be right. Our bodies will follow suit. And it works in the positive end of that as well. Another piece that beliefs essentially play into is dictating our emotions, or our emotional responses. Since emotions are derived from thoughts, beliefs are merely these practiced or repeated thoughts about something, and therefore are going to have a significant impact on our emotions. Okay, so the origins of belief. Where do we establish our belief systems? How do they start? Initially, it's from imprinting from external sources. So as young children, our parents, our teachers, religious leaders, institutional, cultural, marketing messages, all of these influences affect our belief systems, of course, not just when we're young, but as we continue on through life and as we gain some maturity, we also learn to establish our own belief systems, either accepting or rejecting or modifying some early belief systems based on our own assessments from life experience. Oftentimes, belief formation is unconsciously done so. And throughout time, it's very easy not to reevaluate our belief systems consciously. And that's essentially what I want to address in this discussion today. Instead of being actively involved in evaluating our conscious belief systems, we often tend to look for reinforcement of the confirmation bias we already have in our current beliefs. The confirmation bias is essentially seeking to find evidence which supports our existing beliefs. It feels good to be right about something, right? I mean, I think we all have that sense, like, it not only feels good to be right about guessing the right answer on Jeopardy or knowing the answer to Jeopardy, but being right in your belief system, again, which is a subjective thing. So we tend to look for both material as well as social evidence to justify our positions. And oftentimes from this, we'll dwell in our own echo chambers, so to speak, whether it's discussing topics or belief systems with family, friends, the kind of media we consume, the authors we read, the podcasts we listen to, that sort of thing. It is typically a more uncomfortable thing to expose ourselves to schools of thought that are outside or not as resonant with our own belief systems. For better, for worse, it's an uncomfortable thing. And unfortunately, the downside of this, if we're not consciously evaluating or checking in with our belief systems, even if in just particular areas of life where we might want to have some growth or notice that we're not growing in a way that we want to, it's kind of like a gardener who neglects to tend to the garden and it ends up growing weeds. Those unchecked weeds will tend to dominate the garden and hog all the nutrients and the water from the flowers and the plants that you're trying to grow, and the weeds will tend to dominate the garden. In a similar manner, the unchecked or negative, let's say for this case, the unchecked belief systems that are, let's say, less than helpful for us will tend to dominate your experience. The good news in all of this is that we have a choice in our habits of thought and what we feed our minds. This is why sales training often incorporates personal development, because a salesperson, to be successful, needs to have a high level of belief or confidence in their product, service, the industry they're a part of, and in themselves to be able to articulate value to their potential customers. So the real question here is, are your overall beliefs or is your overall belief system life-supporting or life-limiting? And it's usually not a binary sort of thing. Often we have beliefs about a lot of different sorts of things. But in general, to kind of narrow this down a little bit, I think a useful question to look at is, what is your dominant general feeling most of the time? What is your overall bias in terms of emotional expression? Do you tend to be happy, or do you tend to be sad or depressed? Are you more optimistic, or are you more pessimistic? Do you tend to be more critical of other people, or do you follow more of a live and let live philosophy? Do you find yourself feeling stressed most of the time or more anxiety-ridden? Do you feel at peace and trust that all is well? Or do you always feel like you have to be looking around the next corner, waiting for the other shoe to drop? Those sorts of things. I'm pulling some polarities here just to give an example of contrast from something that feels more, I would put on the higher end of the spectrum, a higher vibrating type of emotion, something that feels good versus something that feels less good or bad. And in this sense, given that we have the nature as human beings to serve confirmation bias, we're looking for reasons to prove we're right. I would propose the question here: if you're feeling less than good most of the time, would you rather be happy than right? In other words, would you rather be right in looking for things that continue to reinforce your belief system, or maybe change your belief system about what would better serve you? In other words, would you rather adopt an empowering belief system than cling to something that resonates with your current life-limiting kind of view? So here I'm going to cover a couple of common or life-limiting negative beliefs you may not believe you even have. And these things are embedded in our language, and we're not necessarily even aware of how much we reinforce them. And these belief systems touch every area of our life, including business or professional or career development, certainly interpersonal relationships, financial or material wealth, our health in physical, mental, emotional, overall well-being. All of these areas are touched in many ways by this. And I believe most of these fall under the bin of scarcity. I'll give a few examples here. If you ever find yourself saying or resonate with people saying, I don't have enough, fill in the blank. It's really saying I don't have enough resources, like I don't have enough money, money doesn't grow on trees, takes money to make money. These are all statements that say I don't have enough money. Or I don't have enough time, I'm just too busy. Or maybe it's I'm too old, or I'm too young, or I don't have enough education or experience. Can't teach an old dog new tricks. I live in too small of a town. I live in too large of a city. I don't know enough people. I'll never meet the right person or the right people. Or I'm not enough. Typically, this is qualified with some other type of enough, like I'm not tall enough, I'm not strong enough, I'm not fast enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not rich enough, I'm not social enough, I'm not good enough. Ultimately, it's saying I'm not enough. These are all scarcity elements. Another type of scarcity is the zero-sum belief, the zero-sum game. If you've ever heard or thought for yourself, I'm wary if something good happens because if it does, then something bad's going to come along soon afterward to cancel it out. Another way this can show up is if you're in business and you think, if my competition succeeds, then they're going to steal my customers or my clients. Definitely a zero-sum game, as if people can't be a customer or a client of more than one business. Kind of crazy, right? But people hold these beliefs. This is also similar to a false dichotomy, where we unnecessarily and illogically place two things in opposition that don't need to be. This sounds something like, I cannot do X because I have to do Y. This is akin to saying, I can't eat breakfast because I plan to eat dinner. And you might think, well, why is that? And maybe if it's a calorie budget or a financial budget, in either case, it's a budget, right? But the whole point is breakfast and dinner really don't have anything explicitly to do with each other on their own. There's another component that I think is a subset of scarcity, but that can show up in a victim mentality or a martyr kind of complex. So just to throw out a few ways this can show up is if you ever find yourself or hear people saying, bad things always happen to me, or sometimes it can be voiced in a third party expression, but it's the same belief of why do bad things happen to good people? Or I'm always the responsible one who has to clean things up. No one has it as difficult as I do. Other people have it out for me. Nobody loves me, nobody understands me, nobody appreciates me, these kinds of things. All of these are beliefs in scarcity. So if any of those sound familiar or something that may be a belief that you may have practiced, maybe in a little bit different words, but the essence of those beliefs, I'm going to propose some suggestions for how you may want to shift those. In doing so, you can dramatically change the quality of your life. So a great question is, how do you know that you have one of these core beliefs? And core isn't really necessarily any more powerful than any other belief, but it tends to be very well practiced so much that you don't even question or know that it exists. So to find this out, you have to have at some level a conscious evaluation of subconscious programs. And a key bit of feedback that can help you notice this is an emotional state or a trigger. Whenever you have a negative emotion about something, it often indicates that you have a belief or a story or some narrative around it that is misaligned for you. And so what's really important is when you get triggered or when you find yourself in a, let's say, less than positive emotional state, to sort of capture or journal random thoughts or judgments that you might be feeling in these moments. Once you have awareness around this, recognize that it is a process to change beliefs. Keyword being a process. It isn't a light switch. It is something that takes some time and some retraining, just like any other thing in our bodies or our beings. We all have an internal BS detector. So if you have a well-formed or a long-practiced belief about something that's deeply held, that feels like truth, that feels like fact, we have this internal bit of inertia that's going to resist change, just like we would in any other aspect of life. Just like it takes a little bit to establish a new muscle memory when learning a new sport, this is rebuilding a muscle memory in our way of thinking, in what we're choosing to believe about something. So first we have to recognize when we're going down a familiar negative spiral and then interrupt that internal conversation or mental chatter that's going on. Also recognizing that with this inertia that we're overcoming, it's very, very difficult to make a 180-degree shift and choose to believe something that's entirely out of phase or the opposite of what you've been believing. So really lean into making incremental, more positive shifts. So when you're making these incremental shifts, it's important to be open to practicing this a bit of cognitive dissonance, but in a positive sense. In other words, being open to holding two contradictory beliefs. And if you're open to holding two contradictory beliefs, you can begin to notice and specifically seek evidence that supports the new belief that would be contradicting your old. Let's consider that you may have a very well-formed belief that you ultimately consider to be law, as if it's tried and true and there's no rebutting it. As long as there's only one example that contradicts that law, then it can no longer be law, just as in the scientific method. So in other words, if you are finding yourself saying something like, bad things are always happening to me, as long as you can identify one positive thing that happens, then always is not true in that, correct? So as long as you begin the practice of being open to identifying things that might be outside your belief system or your subjective holding of how things are, so to speak, then you can be a little bit more open to changing the wording around that. Well, maybe bad things don't always happen to me. At times, good things happen to me unexpectedly. That's something. Maybe give that a whirl. Or instead of something like, I'm too old for whatever, identify one person, as long as you find one example that your age or older who's accomplished what you want to accomplish or has what you want to have, and you can say something to the effect of, and again, it has to be true, not completely out of phase with that BS detector that you have, but you could try on a phrase like, I'm pleasantly surprised by my adaptability to new situations. Or even if you can't make that far of a leap of your own adaptability, you could try the observation, I'm pleasantly surprised by viewing other people adapt to new situations at whatever age in life. Something like that. The language has to be coherent with you, but it really does require that willingness to step outside of and release some of the constriction that you hold on this limiting belief. So ultimately, finding a counterexample to your built-in law is a great way to make a start. And then you have to begin adopting a new thought process. Adopting a new thought process or a new belief system is really most important critically to identify an adjacent or an incrementally positive belief. Again, something that's not entirely out of phase. If you have an ongoing story in your head of, I don't have enough education or experience, you can easily shift that for yourself if you read a blog post or a book or have a conversation or listen to a podcast, something where you learn something new, and you can then say to yourself, I learn something new every day. That's a very different kind of muscle that you're building, or the belief that's saying I'm incapable of learning versus I am capable of learning. Or another one here with the example I gave earlier of I cannot afford X because of Y, the false dichotomy we create. In truth, if you step back, again, this is kind of like the prism example, look a little bit larger and say, well, X and Y are independent things, and I chose to link those together. And you can take a step back from that and recognize that we all budget our resources, time, money, energy, based on our values and priorities. So instead of putting X and Y, whatever X and Y are, against each other, you might try on a phrase such as, I'm pleased that I direct my time, energy, and resources to what matters most to me. I like something like this because it evokes an openness. It reinforces that you have personal agency in making decisions. It's also a reflection of gratitude, and it opens the door to an ability to draw in more. So the last component of this then is celebrating the sprouts. I referred to this in the second video I did on being in flow, where you are celebrating the evidence of the new belief that's recurring in your life. So again, the idea of if you learned one new thing from a book or a podcast, celebrate that. Like, I took an action that was actually useful for me, or I proved to myself I could learn something. That was great. It's important to look for evidence of the new thought pattern, the new belief that you're choosing to hold subjectively, recurring in your life, and that it's bearing fruit. Acknowledge the success from even one time, one successful manifestation. So, in other words, expressing appreciation for something that goes well. Like, you might have had a belief system in the example of people are just rude everywhere. And instead you're choosing to believe, I'm looking to be surprised and delighted by the random acts of strangers and the kindness of strangers in my neighborhood. The first time somebody holds a door open for you or yields the right of way to you in traffic, it's great to express appreciation for that, to go, I knew it. I love being surprised and delighted by the positivity and the kindness of strangers. What about all of this resonates with you? Let me know in the comments below. I would love to know if you have any belief systems that are serving you or not serving you, those that you tend to struggle with, or those you would maybe want to have evaluated on this channel. We can maybe go over it in an example of how you might be able to shift that. If you know of anyone who may benefit from what I've shared here, please forward this video to them. And if you found some value in what I've discussed today, I would most certainly appreciate your giving this video a like and clicking on the subscribe button with notifications set to all in order to avoid missing future posts. These small actions only take a few moments, they cost nothing, and they really help support the growth of this channel. Thank you so much for tuning in.